and welcome back to the CODESHO podcast, everybody. Cole and Matt here, and I got just a couple thoughts on where the world is going professionally. So it seems like you see this everywhere. Doctors, even lawyers, like maybe it used to be that like if you if anything, if you broke a knee or something, that maybe you just go to your general practice doctor. I don't know if they even called it that back then. It might have just been the doctor, the town doctor. That's who I'm going to go see. But now if you get like a certain knee injury, you need to go see like a orthopedic surgeon that specializes in like patella, whatever. like literally, like that's doctors are definitely that way. Lawyers are for sure that way. Like I hear in the world lawyers all the time saying like, I'm not a criminal justice attorney, I'm a da-da-da attorney. This is what I do.
In international tax law. Like,
yes.
I used to live overseas, and like I could get lawyers or like accountants or whatever that specialize exactly in my situation, where it's like I'm an American citizen getting paid outside. How do I file taxes?
And nowadays, like, that's exactly what you want. You're going to feel better about spending your money. You know what I mean? Because, like, if you're looking for a lawyer and you find, like, oh, I need a lawyer that's, because I'm dealing with this tax situation, what you're wanting to find is a lawyer that's like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I do.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And I'm really good at it, and here's my history of doing that thing.
It will cost, like, for example, for a lawyer, it will cost you more, but you'll win.
Yeah. And I think there's a few reasons why the world is going this way. Maybe one of them is that the world in general is getting way more talented. People are getting really, really good at the things that they do. That could be part of it. Another part of it is the automation of a lot of things, and this is a controversial topic because a lot of people are not a big fan of the automation of cash registers. And
we should talk about that in another episode.
Yeah, I mean, we might even touch on it a little bit in this episode.
I'm cool with that. Yeah.
But I think what this shows us is, well, these things in and of themselves, I can understand why some people might think they're scary. And I don't want to get into my opinion or the controversialness of it, but let's look at it objectively. Objectively, if that's where the world is going and there's going to be more automation, more machines and computers taking care of like entry-level jobs, we'll call them, then what that's going to force people to do is to find things that they can focus on, get really good at, and especially in like all of the big industries right now, medicine and law and computers and programming, and that's exactly what people are doing. Is they're seeing like, okay, well, companies need an app, they need an iOS developer, and if they want the best iOS app, they're going to want somebody that spent their entire career doing that thing. And no longer are the days really in programming. This is really kind of going away where you're just like, I'm an all-purpose developer. That doesn't really happen anymore.
There's too many fields to specialize in to actually, I mean, there might be a need for that somewhere, but bigger companies aren't interested in that.
Definitely not bigger companies. For sure, startup companies might just want a generally talented programmer. But even when it comes to like the subsets of programming, like web development, that's still a broad category of things. Within web development, there's back end, front end, database management,
or even here's the challenge as well. Like, and you can even subspecialize that. I'm a front end developer. I'm excellent. I'm the best Angular developer you've ever seen. Right? Well, we use React.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those skills are going to transfer over, but the fact is, like, it's a framework. Oh, I'm the best back-end developer you've ever seen in Laravel. I know Laravel like the back of my hand. We use Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it transfers a little bit.
Well, I guess that's why it's important to get into fields that, or like specialties that are in high demand, and also follow those trends because, whereas Node or Laravel might be really popular right now, they're not going to be almost certainly in 10 years. So you're going to have to follow that trend.
It's going to be something different, or it's like
like follow whatever that logical trend is.
Here's my biggest question. Here's the thing I was thinking is, should you specialize or should you be general? That was kind of like the start of this whole conversation. And like you laid some really good groundwork. And I think it also depends on where you're at in life, I guess. Like are you first learning? You talked about in your school, you learned a little bit too much. They gave you too much stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many languages did you learn? 4
like 6 or something like that, yeah.
Plus, are you counting, like, did you learn, like, SQL, MySQL?
Yeah, that was probably one of the 6.
That was one of them, yeah. So the reason this was so interesting to me is because I was a teacher for a long time, and I went to the same school that I ended up teaching at, but it was a game school, and I had mentioned to you, like, I think you should be general, and then you told me, you said, well, you specialized. Like, we literally went to a game school, and then I was like, oh yeah, within games you can further specialize, but I didn't think about that. So you're right. Like, we were specialized in games, but I met a lot of students who would specialize in graphics or physics or AI or something. I don't think that I specialized, but as it turns out, because I wasn't specializing, I was always working on the foundation. The thing you could say I specialized in was learning C++, like learning the language, and like you can call it game engines, but yeah, so like that's what I thought that you should do, and I kept even telling my students to do that. Now I've been an Android developer. Like, all of my jobs have been Android, and I do other stuff. I can do iOS because all the jobs I've had require that. At our job, we touch Laravel all the time, and like I'm looking in the database all the time, like doing simple queries and like simple joins if I'm looking for something. So I think that we are pretty general.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But it's hard. Like, so another thing that people say is like people are looking for a T developer, right? So it's like you're really good in one thing, but like you have a lot of topics, which I think is really good. The interesting thing is, the reason I bring this up is because I think by being general, or that T developer, I think that makes us a really good piece of the team. But if you're looking for a job or anything like that, nobody really cares about those other skills, or at least it doesn't come up. Like, to me, that makes us, like, the fact that that you are willing to jump into, like, you're an iOS dev. Actually, you weren't even hired for iOS.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, your story's interesting. Like, you want to retell your story?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the basic story is that since I kind of got started, I really never knew what I was going to do. I kind of started out as a web dev, got really into Vue, kind of followed that path for a while, took a break, worked on Android for a minute. All along the way, I'm learning iOS because that's really what I like more than anything. Got a project doing that, worked on that for a little while. And then anyways, so at the current job, yeah, I mean, they were kind of looking for a Vue developer. They kind of thought they wanted to build an app also. Like, they wanted to build the front end in Vue on the web, but they also wanted to build the app in Vue. Mm-hmm. But as it turned out, I just ended up building it natively because I thought that was a better option for the company. But yeah, kind of what you said, I think, is a good point, which is that it's good to like specialize in something, but once you get into an actual job, it's good to have other skills so that you can participate in other conversations, contribute to the other parts of the company and to the project. That's really good. But the reality is that when we're applying for jobs, pretty much everybody does this. Like, anytime that you've ever been applying for a job, you almost definitely kind of tweak your resume a little bit for the job that you're applying for, right? Like, everybody does that.
Yeah.
Because like, if I really did want to go get a back-end job somewhere, I'm probably not going to put as...
You're not going to say I'm an iOS dev who knows Laravel. You're going to say I'm a Laravel dev, for example.
And you might even tweak your experience going back, and you might like emphasize on the, like if it's a Laravel job, you might be like, well, at this job, instead of emphasizing iOS, I'm going to emphasize that my roles were Laravel related or whatever. Like, anybody's going to do that. And that kind of is proof right there that employers are looking for specialized individuals.
Yeah.
They might not know it, but I think that the problem is that a lot of companies right now, the hiring squad doesn't really know much about actual technical.
Oh, like the HR or whatever that layer is.
And so because of that, a lot of the hiring can be broken, and they might end up getting the wrong people. I mean, actually, I'll let you kind of talk about that a little bit, because I know you have some thoughts on like whiteboarding and whether or not that's a good process.
So there's a couple of different things. Way back when I was trying to get my second job here in Vegas. I had worked on C#, so I knew C#, but not .NET. Like, I didn't know that those were different. Like, it's like the web framework versus C# the language, and I had built forms because I had built a whole bunch of level editors. And then at the previous job, at job number 1 in Vegas, I was working on back end. I didn't set it up, so I didn't feel comfortable saying like, oh, I know .NET. Somebody else had set up these back end servers for me, and I was able to go in and tweak the code to do whatever I needed, right? Like, and I could do that with production too. I didn't do that. Like, those would be separate deploys, but like I would have like a staging server that I would just actually modify the code on. I didn't know anything about this, but so this recruiter kept asking me like, oh, so you know like .NET? And I was like, well, I know C#. And it's like, well, how long you been using that? It's like, well, I don't know. It's like I made level editors, and like they didn't know, and that's fair. Maybe nobody would want me because of that, but and I don't know that. I don't know that either. And so it's like they're trying to ask questions that they don't know much about to fit my weird experience with this thing. And probably the answer would have been no, right? So, but I didn't know enough about .NET versus just C#. But I was like, well, I can do it. Like I can do the language. So I thought that was interesting. And so I think that sometimes recruiters are like that. Ideally, you can get a technical recruiter where they know some stuff. But yeah, so that feels broken a little bit. But in general, I feel like I feel like interviewing is broken as well.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why my buddy was applying for Snapchat, and he went through a little bit of the process, and like they gave him a packet of information, and one of the things it said was, at Snapchat, we like to make our interviews more like the stuff you'll be doing day to day. And then further down in that packet of information, it said, understand that interviews are a little bit different, and we're going to be doing some whiteboarding. And it's like, and I thought it was funny. It's like the cognitive dissonance they have there. It's like they're on the same packet of, like, on their same interview packet, they recognize that the whiteboarding stuff is not, it's like, I don't want to say it's 100% not helpful, but I don't always think it's doing the thing that people want it to do.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing that they want it to do is obviously get to know how skilled you are in certain, or if you're skilled at all in certain areas. I actually was talking to a buddy last night that's kind of looking at getting into programming, and he asked me, because what I told him, we could talk about this a little bit, but what he told me is, I want to go get a like certificate at a college, like it's like a 1-year program. I want to get a certificate in programming or just in general software development. And I told him, I was like, yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, if you watch the podcast, you know my feelings on this. Like, I was like, I just really feel like over the course of a year, you could actually learn enough to get a job and start working for sure if you really applied yourself and really dug deep and just learned yourself. But if you just follow this certificate, I can guarantee you that at the end of it, you're not ready for your first job.
Oh, yeah,
There's just no way.
Yeah.
Like, even after I did an associate program, which is a 2-year program, definitely that alone was not enough to prepare me for what was going to be out there. So he was like, well, then how would anybody want to hire me without having some kind of education or whatever? And I was like, believe it or not, like, the programming industry is a weird one because education doesn't play as much of a role as a lot of other like industries do or whatever. So he was like, well, then how do they know whether or not I know what I'm talking about? And I was like, well, it's a good question. There's a couple ways. And one of those is whiteboarding. And I told him that's one of my least favorite because here's my issue with whiteboarding. It's not a good representation of what I actually know because in reality, if you give me a problem at work, the last thing that I'm going to do is sit in front of a bunch of people that I don't know, work it out without researching the topic at all. Like anytime that I build anything, most of the time that we approach a feature at work, it's a lot. And we do a discovery, we do like an R&D phase, and we're kind of learning about how we're going to build this thing. And that involves research. That involves leaning on people that might know more than me on the internet. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Somebody that can admit that they don't know everything and is willing to go look things up, research them, lean on people that know more than them, that person is way more valuable than somebody that's just going to sit here and write code without doing any research. That's why whiteboarding just makes no sense to me. Like that's not the average life of a programmer. Like you tell them you're looking for somebody that basically doesn't use Stack Overflow. Well, no.
Yeah. So this is where I don't, and maybe different companies, like the ones that there could be an argument for whiteboarding, but and one of those, and the thing that people always say is they're looking to see how you approach and solve problems. okay, maybe it's not 100% real world, and that's fine. And then
Well,
also
it's not real world at all because I wouldn't
because you wouldn't approach it and solve a
I
problem
wouldn't
like that.
approach and solve a problem without doing research.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I just wouldn't.
And that's fair. I mean, yeah. I agree. I agree 100% with you.
Or I would have a conversation with my coworker.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times is it like, we're talking to whoever, blah, 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 we got this new feature. Okay, Matt, let's have a talk. And then you
Yeah.
and I talk for an hour about, how we're going to set it up. We're going to do a little bit of research. Like, that's real. That's how actual
yeah.
software development is done.
Like, yeah. But the problem that I feel or I've seen with actually none of the jobs that I've got I've done whiteboard interviews, but the jobs that I got,
They didn't.
they didn't have any whiteboard interviews. One of them had a take-home assessment. I like the take-home assessment a little bit more.
I love that one.
Maybe
That's what we do.
That's what we do. Yeah. Maybe there could be cheating involved. So that's why you have a discussion afterwards. I think the best thing to do is to talk and take more time with it. The problem with whiteboarding is, like I said, I've applied for jobs, like I said, that I've done whiteboarding and I didn't get those jobs. It feels more like what they could be doing, even though it's not real world. They're maybe trying to assess your level of knowledge of algorithms and data structures. Fine. For mobile developers, I don't think that's super important day to day. It depends. Like, I mean, like, we're not writing code like that, but like, hopefully you do know about a tree structure because your UI views are all a tree structure. Okay, so you should know something like that. But what I feel like people do, and I was reading some articles about this, it seems like people are more like lording over somebody. Like, that's, some people have really negative views about that, where it's like they feel superior, and it becomes like pass or fail. It's like, oh, well, you didn't solve it exactly the way that I hoped that you would solve it.
Yeah.
And okay, but I solved it, and it's like now we have a working algorithm.
And we can talk about it.
And we can talk about it, and we can improve it. And there's to me that would be the ideal situation. I think that I would still hire a candidate. Let's say there was a situation where they're building an algorithm, and because they know about whiteboarding interviews, so they're building an algorithm, and the one that they come up with is the n-squared algorithm, like the slower brute force version. They recognize that it's slower, and they think, okay, well, there's probably a better way to do this, but let me get this first. And then they're working out the problems and catching edge cases and things like that.
And that's real software development.
That, to me, that's exactly. That's
Literally, that's real. Is building something, realizing that maybe this is the n-squared approach, and then being like, okay, I recognize that there's probably a way to do it without that being the case. So let's find the more linear way to solve this problem.
Yeah. Now that we have something that works, a function that we can call, we can improve the performance. I think that's actually the more real world way to do it. But what I've heard about, and possibly what I've experienced, when you do these interviews, you don't always get feedback. So you don't know if, like, okay, why was it pass or fail? Maybe it's because whatever. Like, there could be lots of reasons. But like, if somebody was writing solid code and they had an understanding of data structures and algorithms, and they had an understanding of the language, I don't think the whiteboard would make me not want to hire somebody.
Yeah.
It might make me want to hire somebody if somebody really nailed it. Okay, like if somebody was just like, oh yeah, this is simple, you just do I don't know, I can't even come up with like whatever, like you would do this kind of like algorithm. Like, if somebody clearly knew it better, and maybe that really is what they're looking for. So it might be the way to separate people, but I don't think it would necessarily be the piece that removed them from the chain.
Yeah, and I feel like it's more realistic to look at it that way because, like, you have to understand that, like, I feel like for a long time, humans have structured things, academics, interviews, jobs. Like, literally, we've structured everything based on the premise that generally people are alike. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that, like, by whiteboarding somebody, you're saying that, like, well, this works for this one type of person, so therefore we're just going to do it to everybody. And it's like, I mean, I'm not saying that like, you have to be so creative with your interview process that it's almost unusable. That's not what I'm saying. Like, you definitely do need to quiz somebody on their technical ability, but you have to recognize that everybody's different. Everybody learns differently. Everybody writes code differently. I mean, there's a zillion ways that you could build the same application.
Yeah.
So you have to recognize that people are just different. And if you want to test somebody, this guy might not do very well with whiteboarding. He might feel like it's too much pressure. He might get anxious. It might just not be a good way to test his skills, but you might miss out on a phenomenal developer because you think that whiteboarding is the way to solve that problem.
This person, so this is, again, I've done whiteboard interviews. The jobs that I've gotten didn't have whiteboard interviews. One of the and all of the interviews that I've done, or even all the whiteboard interviews that I've done, have been for mobile development, like very specific. Those are the jobs I've applied for. But every job I've ever worked at the very least, I've written bash scripts to automate processes. Like at the very first job I made, we ended up doing a mobile app, and we had these apps separate on iOS and Android, and then our front end guy ended up switching the website. He wanted to do Angular, and so he was pushing for the mobile to switch over to Ionic, the hybrid framework, so that we could reuse some code. And I was like, yeah, no problem. So that was also like, this was a job that had no whiteboard interview, but the point was I was able to jump in. I was happy to jump in. But as part of that, I built it in a flexible way, and I built a script that would take that Ionic framework, build it out for Android and iOS, and also like build it out. I had these separate folders for our different clients. We were like reskinning an app, one for like, it was like a registered agent company. So like one for Nevada, one for Washington or Wyoming or whatever. And so that cut the build time. Like if somebody had to actually build that out, it would take like 30 minutes because like the Ionic stuff is just slow, and you want to like switch everything out and then upload it to the Git. Like they do this thing, whatever. But I wrote these build scripts that saved. You just type in build. That's basically it.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like,
and that's something that's not going to come out of a whiteboard.
That's
like,
exactly it. Yeah, it's like there's these additional skills. Like if you got whiteboarded for Vue at this current job, which you didn't, but if you did, then you end up switching over to iOS, like helping out on Android and building the back end.
Yeah.
What? Like, so that's where it's like broken. Just because somebody doesn't have the best, again, like doesn't have the perfect algorithm, doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't be a benefit to that company.
Yeah. Well, that's why when I interview people, I like to approach it as it's just a conversation. I want to try as much as possible to eliminate that like intimidation factor. That's not, for me, that doesn't help at all. Like me trying to come down on you authoritatively.
No way.
That's not, plus that's not good leadership anyways, even if we were working together. So when I talk to you, I'm a developer, let's have a conversation. I actually interviewed a developer one time, and he would have definitely worked underneath me. But I had actually told him it was very clear this was the right guy for the job. We were going to hire him, whatever. And I told him, I'm like, because I got the sense that he thought that he had to like talk to me a certain way. And I was like, look, man, make no mistake. Like, we are interviewing you because we need your help with this thing that we're not good at. Like, I'm actually really excited to learn from you. It seems like you know a lot, and that's gonna contribute a lot to this project. And after that, like, his entire mood had changed. And now we could just have a comfortable conversation because I am literally not hiring you to like micromanage you. I'm hiring you so that you can help me with this part of the application that we're struggling with. This thing that we don't know about, or this thing that hasn't even been built yet. Like I want you. So talk to me. That's why I think that, like you said, you could cheat maybe on a coding challenge, but I think that's the best way to go because once they do it, if they did cheat, it'll come out when you talk about it. Let's just talk about your code. And again, let's not, I mean, I get that it could be nerve-wracking because this person could or could not give you a job. I get that part. But in general, that should be the only thing that makes you nervous. Like nothing else should really make you nervous.
If writing a small application makes you nervous, then you need to figure out why and get over that. That's what I'd say. Like again, you could cheat at it, but that's why the follow-up should be thorough. So and like me as the interviewer, interviewer should look at their code. Like, I should know that level of code, and then I should be able to ask them about it. And like, I should at least know, like, oh, this is way better than I would write. And then I can ask them about that stuff. Hopefully I learn something from it in that case. If it's way lower, then I can ask why they approached the problems that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could cheat, but actually, so we had one of the Android people that applied for our job. We did the phone interview, and it went really well. And it was. I think I said the same thing. It's like, let's just talk. Let's just. And it seemed like things were going really well. They seemed like he seemed really smart. And then when he did the coding interview, or like the coding challenge, the take-home coding challenge. It just didn't work. It didn't it compiled. It compiled, but it didn't do what it needed to do.
Yeah.
And then so at that point, it's like, okay, maybe you should have scaled down your approach a little bit more and get something successful out. Because like at this point, I don't know what you know or don't know.
Yeah.
And so that's the hard part. Like, get something working, and then we could have had a better discussion about that.
Yeah.
But in that case, he didn't.
I think that a lot of people he's the complete opposite for sure, but I think a lot of people approach interviews and maybe one thing that gets them really nervous is they are expecting the interviewer to expect more from them. And it's like, just be honest about your skill. Yeah. If the job application was for Vue or something and they're asking you about Laravel, it would be extreme. Like, you don't even have to sit there and lie. Like, just be genuine, be authentic. Hey, that's not something that I've worked with. I'm eager to learn it if I can help. And that's, but in general, like, no, this is what I specialize in. I've interviewed people like that before. And I mean, like, seriously, like, if you're interviewing for, like, I don't know, like, let's say a Vue developer, and you're talking to this guy and he's like, look, I'm just a master of Vue. Like, I'm really, really good at it. And you start talking to him about other things. Oh, do you know Laravel? No, I don't know Laravel. Do you know SQL? No, I don't know SQL. But it's pretty clear that, like, this dude spent his whole career doing Vue. Like, you're going to get an expert. You're going to get somebody specialized. Yeah. That's what you're hiring for. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know. I think, like I said, I think that's where the world is going. I think, though, that it's kind of, as industries evolve, that specialization gets more and more and more and more and more narrow right now. Right now in programming, the state that things are in right now, you're looking for somebody under an umbrella, not too specialized that they're no good in any other area. Like, as I sit here and talk about a Vue developer, I could see it being frustrating to have somebody that could only do Vue. Like, you might really want a Vue master, and if you've got a lot of work for them, go for it. But in more cases than not, in companies that are not just super big corporate companies, they need people that can kind of move around and whatever. Yeah. So, but within reason, like, and within reason, what I mean is, like, at our job, it's pretty standard that all the developers get pretty comfortable with the Laravel back-end side of things as well as the front-end side of things. It's not ridiculous. It's not too much. Like, they don't have unreasonable expectations, but you need to be able to pivot and move a little bit. That's the nature of the business.
Yeah.
So that's that. But that specialization is mainly, like, either you're a full-stack developer on the web or you're like a full-stack developer in mobile, and you can also contribute to the APIs or whatever.
Yeah. That's actually what's interesting. And again, this is part of what I was thinking about. Yeah, for web, it is more common that people at least call themselves full stack. People joke, like, it might be incorrect, and that's fine. Yeah. I think it's incorrect. At one of my other jobs, somebody had said, "What's a full stack developer?" A back end developer who knows HTML and CSS. Yeah. And it's like, so I guess
that's actually a really good way of putting it. That in my experience is really what it is.
Yeah, which is fine because. Potentially fine. Again, obviously it depends on what the company wants, but like, if you have a designer, the designer is actually probably coming up with, like, how, like the look of the site or whatever. And if you do know, I don't know. I guess we have some people that are just front end developers.
We do. Front end developers are an interesting breed of people to me because it takes a very specific kind of person to be good at that. Like, front end development. I like front end. I hate HTML and CSS. I cannot.
I was
going
to say CSS is strange to me. That's the only thing that's strange. I haven't gotten good at that.
I'm not a big fan of that. I do like front end development as it applies to mobile engineering, though. As long as I have a designer telling me what to make it look like. I really enjoy that. I actually enjoy the UI work a lot. I just don't like coming up with the UI. And I feel like a lot of times if you hire a front-end dev, normally that's kind of the expectation, is that this person can design a little bit. They've got some design skill. But they also just need to be really, really good with these JavaScript frameworks and HTML and CSS. And that it's tough. I don't know. Like CSS never does what I want it to do, ever.
Yeah.
I feel like it says like, oh, you're obviously not a front-end dev. Display block? No. We'll do something else. It just never works.
So full stack for web, that seems more like if you're a senior back-end developer, you're typically probably applying for like these full stack jobs. The things that we've done at this job seem interesting to me because I know a couple of other mobile devs, and maybe you could talk about some of the friends that you know, but I don't hear much about full stack mobile devs.
Yeah, I don't either.
And I don't know why that is.
I bet it's probably because typically mobile development is pretty involved. Like there's a lot going on. That person could probably stay fairly busy just doing that.
Yeah.
And how do I say this? We've said it before. The barrier to entry to mobile development is steeper than web development. That doesn't mean that or that web development is easier. I think to be completely specialized in front-end web and front-end mobile are equally hard. But that's exactly what I mean. Specialization is equally hard, but it's easier to get into web development than it is mobile development, in my opinion.
So this is already interesting. Here's the thing, and I think we've talked about this. If I want to become an iOS dev, there is the framework to learn, but it's also like double-click Xcode and start a new project, and that's it. It's gonna run.
Is this an argument for why it's
easier?
It's easy?
Why I think this is why it's easier to get started on iOS because and you have to learn Swift. Again, like the framework.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Yeah, okay, but what do you have to learn if you want to be a web dev? You can get something printing in the JavaScript or like in the console, but you have to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Now those are three things. Vanilla, that's like vanilla JavaScript, right?
Is that any different than having to learn Swift, storyboards, and/or Swift UI, core data? You know what I mean?
But you don't have to do core data because I've never done that. And like I understand you do have to learn storyboards, but also storyboard, like they give you that tool and it's in depth, so you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like like auto layout really well.
Mm-hmm.
I know it well enough to get the look that I want, and that's how it was. I'm getting better at it certainly, but like you do like an hour and you can lay out stuff. Like the tool is really powerful. You're not an expert at it, but like look at CSS. You're talking about like because
I guess you're right.
That piece is all code. I guess that's
I do
the
think
difference.
maybe you're oversimplifying it a little bit because you're used to it.
That's
like
fair.
I just think like I see whenever I show people JavaScript and HTML and CSS, most people are like, "Oh, okay, boom, got that. Oh, I see. So you put H1, and if you want to make it bold, you put H1 bold or text whatever bold." And then most people are like, "Okay, cool." And then with JavaScript, select that item and change the text. Like I feel like it registers with people. They're like, "Okay, I see that. That makes sense. That's how you design it. That's how you do the logic. Boom, whatever." But whenever I show people Swift and I'm like, okay, this is the view controller. And right here, we're going to override this viewDidLoad function, making sure that we call super.viewDidLoad. And they're like, why? That doesn't actually do anything. And you're like, no, just trust me. It doesn't do anything, but you still need to do it because it's conventional. Well, what does conventional mean? Like, you're just like, let's not worry about that. Okay, so cool. Now we're going to make an IB outlet. Okay, what's an IB outlet? Okay, but this IB outlet's a property of the class. And
that's fair.
People are just like, oh my God, whereas JavaScript is just a scripting language. You're just like, oh, get that element, change the text.
Yeah, but then also you want to display that somewhere. Because it becomes, I think it quickly becomes, because like you learned web first, which is interesting. I didn't.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I think it's easier.
Because you have to learn Node. But in order to learn Node, you have to learn command line.
What do you mean you have to learn Node?
Wouldn't you? I mean, I guess you wouldn't have to. Like if you were going to use one of these other, like at a certain point, you want to do something like in Vue or Angular. Like now, obviously, like it's like the next step. If you wanted to take that code and you wanted to go put it on the web, like you've built this website, like how would you do that?
Oh, you don't need Node to do that.
You don't necessarily. I know. Like what? Like you would just put it on.
With like Vue or something, you could. I mean, you would have to learn how to set up like a server, and you'd have to learn like Nginx or Apache or whatever. But I mean, okay, I see what you're saying, but like,
you just casually, you'd have to learn like Nginx or
well,
something.
okay, no, actually, I take that back. You don't necessarily have to do that because there's like
Heroku.
Yeah, like Heroku's one of them where you could just deploy a Vue app, and it literally doesn't need Node or anything like that at all if it's just a front end app, because you could just deploy the distribution folder or whatever. But I get what you're saying.
Okay, so like, what if you want to display a list of data? Like,
I feel like that's 100 times easier in HTML and CSS and JavaScript.
Is it? I mean, you could be right.
Dude, I mean, like, okay, let's say you want to display a list of data in iOS. You're going to use like a table view, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Try to explain a table view to somebody that's never written Swift before, never made an iOS. They're going to be like, what is going on here?
How? The thing is, so this is a real question for me because I don't know. Let's say I have a list of like labels, or I have a list of strings that I want to display on a web page. I'm going to loop through and make them all H1 tags. How do I do that?
Like with vanilla, or with,
Yeah,
I mean,
vanilla.
a lot of people use jQuery. I guess I don't know. jQuery's kind of dead. If you're in Vue, it's really easy.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. But now you got to learn Vue.
Yes. Okay. So if we're gonna do it in like vanilla JavaScript, then you just need to create like a div, and then you give that div like an ID, and then you're gonna say like document.querySelector,
So
select that ID,
yeah.
and then .append, and then you're just gonna put in like the string of HTML. It's actually pretty easy. Like, it would actually not be that bad. Like, but with a table view in iOS, you're gonna have to have a basic understanding of delegates and protocols. Without that, you're nowhere with a table view. So you got to get that. You got to understand how to make a table view cell. How to, like, oh my God, here's one thing with table views and collection views that every time I explain this, to a new dev. That part where you say like let cell equal tableview.deq reusable cell, and then you have to cast it to the class that you. Every time I get there, people are just like, oh my God, like, what is going on here? And you're like, well, all of these cells are the same cell. And they're like, what? No, they're not. Like, they look very, very different. And you're like, yeah, but they're not. It's reusing the same one. And then, like, whenever you scroll up and that one goes out of view, it's grabbing that and putting it back in. And then they're just like, okay, I can't understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
I mean, I even know people that I've worked with that made table views, and they don't understand what's going on. They've, like, got the boilerplate code down that gets something on screen, but they don't actually understand what's going on. But I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe.
Yeah, I understand.
It just seems like to make an it's literally the name. Like, JavaScript's like a scripting language.
Yeah.
You can literally just jump in and kind of just start writing stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like if you don't understand what a class is, you cannot be an iOS developer. It's not going to work. If you don't understand how to use interfaces and or protocols,
so, I mean, you're right. So in order to get something up on screen with HTML, JavaScript, CSS, that is easier.
I think what you're making an argument for, and you are right about this, but maybe you're indirectly saying this, the development environment of iOS is much more refined and much easier to use than JavaScript. Like, there's no really good, like, I don't know, every time that I meet like a web developer, there's like all these different tools that they use. They've all got these very custom setups
like Gulp,
that they use.
Gulp or like Webpack. I don't know if those are the same thing, or I'm pretty sure they're related.
That too, but just down to the IDE that they use, the browser they use, the development tools that they use, just all around the development environment. I mean, literally everything. With iOS development, you're like, I use Xcode.
I use Xcode. Yeah.
I mean, the only other thing you can use is app code, and if you're using storyboards, you can't even really use that.
Yeah.
So.
Or like Android Studio.
Yeah.
Do you even use anything else?
And for example, if you wanted to like debug the app, you're using the simulator. There's no, I guess you could use a real device, but you're doing one of those two things. With web development, you might use Chrome as the browser or Safari. You may or may not use the dev tools built in. You might install third-party dev tools. You might even have some other kind of, like, I've seen people that have like browsers that are like development browsers that show on one screen like all of the different screen sizes and stuff. So you can.
Cool.
There's just so many different tools.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is maybe web development is just as hard to get into because there's all of these different little ways of doing it. There's different IDEs, there's different workflows, there's different. with iOS, it is pretty clear, and I think that's what you're saying. Like you could just jump into Xcode.
You can jump into
and
Xcode.
go.
You're going to live there for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get an app running obviously by just clicking play. But yeah, like how do you link up? Yeah. And so I get what you're saying too. Okay, you want to get a label? Oh, just drag it on screen. Okay, that's easy. But now you have to view both of these things, make an IB outlet that connects. What? Like that's yeah.
Yeah, and then you're like, what is that? What does the exclamation point mean at the end of the property? Like, is that needed? Does that need to be there? Why does that say weak? Why does it say weak var? Whatever.
Yeah.
Do you need that? No, you don't need that. But here's why you may want it. Like, and then people are just like, it's really tough. It's really confusing.
Stuff, yeah.
That being said, there's plenty of mobile developers out there that jump in and they just kind of learn as they go, and that's fine. I don't have anything against that. It is just tough. Like, I don't want to rag on anybody too much, but I worked with a guy before, and it was pretty clear. Like, you've been building apps for people, and you very much don't know what you're talking about, and that's kind of scary that they put a lot of trust in you. And especially, like, he would tell me there was like one company that he worked for, and he was like, "Yeah, the app just completely failed. Like, it just like didn't work at all, and blah blah blah." I'm like, I wonder if that was because of the company or because of you.
I took over for an app. Like I said, at my first job, I got hired for Android, which I took over. There was already an existing app, and they were building for another client. They were building an iOS app, and then that guy quit like a month. I think he quit because he knew that we were going to work together or whatever, and he was worried about people looking at his code. And I looked at his code, and he didn't know what he was doing. There was so much bad code, and that was it. This is one of those things where the interviews probably don't work out in people's favor. Again, we didn't have whiteboarding at that company, but I guarantee you that guy looked better on paper. He had probably been doing iOS for like 4 years, and I made like some games or whatever, right? But so like on paper, he looks better. Senior iOS developer, and I think at that time they called me a junior. They're hiring for senior, but they hired me as a junior. But he couldn't write code. All of his stuff broke, so I had to like go and like rework it. And so yeah, like he didn't know what he was doing. This is where you don't. I mean, we kind of discussed this back in like how to learn and like my schooling, but this is why. Obviously, DigiPen was still specialized, but like we take you through this long process, and this is why we did command line programs first. So like the goal of DigiPen was to make sure that you knew C and C++ first before you're dealing with graphics.
Yeah.
Because those are two different things. Now, that doesn't have to be the way you want to do it. That took 4 years, right? And game development is obviously very specialized, so we want you to be able to get a job right away. If you want to get a job quickly, if you're studying on your own, you don't have time to become a general dev.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
You bring up a good point. So here's one thing that I want to admit. Anytime that I talk to somebody, I very rarely come at them from the perspective of like, well, let's try to get you to be the absolute best developer you can and be the most ideal candidate once you're ready to apply. And like, that might take a little bit more time. Like I never come at them that way. I'm always coming at them like, how can you learn the absolute quickest, get a job as quickly as possible? And part of me, I don't think is wrong for that, because you're going to learn much faster once you actually start working. Like the speed at which you learn will grow dramatically.
And when you actually get the chance to work with like more senior devs, that's like you're going to learn so much.
Yeah. But I'm usually coming at them from that perspective, and I wonder if that ends up being harmful, because that approach of like just getting somebody into a job as quick as possible, that's what creates those people that don't have a refined understanding. Because like here's the other problem. It's easier to appeal to somebody if you say like, hey, you can get into this really quickly, just follow these steps, build these things, create this resume, and go ahead and get hired. That's much more, it's easier to be motivated by that than it is to say, hey, how about we spend the next 4 years, I'm going to make sure that you understand good architecture.
Of course.
That's like really, really, really hard. And so it's like a balance, because I don't want to be the cause of a bunch of developers that don't understand good architecture.
Yeah.
Or they don't understand everything that they need to know. I don't want to produce that, but I also don't want to discourage people from getting into programming.
Of course. Yeah.
If you tell somebody it's going to take 4 years, like a lot of people are not going to do that.
Yeah.
It's amazing that college is still as popular as it is, given the fact that it does just take a really, really long time.
Well, I think this is my personal opinion, and this is why I also left school. This is one of the reasons I left school, is because I think the allure of college, I think it really was more. I mean, like I'm gonna say our parents' generation, were like our age gap is like a little bit more, but like I still feel like we're peers. But it seemed like our parents and our grandparents' generation were like college was that amazing thing,
Yeah.
and maybe it still is for certain degrees. Like obviously, like you need it for nursing or being a doctor or like being a lawyer. I think we asked that.
Yeah. Well, there's some things, it's absolutely necessary.
But I don't think that it's necessary for programming. That was the whole point of that last episode.
I'll tell you what the appeal is, because again, I talked to my buddy about this literally last night. Hopefully, he's not mad at me for talking about this. I'll send him a link afterwards. Hey, check this out. But what he told me, and there's nothing wrong with this. What he told me is that he wants to go do the certificate/degree route because it's structured, and he says
Yes.
it's hard sometimes for me to be motivated by things like this because I don't know what I'm doing. It's really unclear. Like, at least if I go do the certificate, it's a clear path. I know that like I don't have to have that like internal motivation because the due date's the due date. Like,
it's structured. There is deadlines. You
Yeah.
have a teacher to ask. You have peers to ask.
there's that like accountability factor.
There's benefits to that.
But the thing that I told him is I was like, I'm not going to discourage you from doing that. Like, there's a lot of benefits to having certificates, and I would be kind of a hypocrite if I told you not to, because I did it. I got a bunch of certificates and I got my degree and all that. And I don't regret doing that. But if I were to go back and do it again, I might do it differently. But I don't regret what I did. I'm happy with the way that I went. So I don't want to say not to do that. And if that works for you, do that, because I felt the same way. Like, whenever I was 18 coming out into the real world, I was like, I want to move as quickly in the right direction as possible.
Yeah.
If I were to just teach myself everything, it would be a mess. It would be super unstructured. But if I can have somebody kind of guide me in the right direction, then that'd be good. So I went to college. So with that being said, I told him, go ahead and do that. But the thing that you have to realize is that once you get into programming, it's always about learning. You're never going to be able to stop learning. So you will at some point have to learn how to be intrinsically motivated, how to be disciplined.
Learn how to learn on your own. Learn how to go find information on your own.
Yep. And even if you choose not to, it's not like at the end of the certificate you're going to be ready for a job. Like, this is a skill that is just necessary from the beginning.
Yeah.
You're going to have to get good at learning on your own. And I got to thinking about it after I told him that, because I'm like, if what I'm saying is true, does that mean it's impossible to get into programming without ever learning on your own at home? And I think the answer is yes, it's impossible. Like, the closest you're going to get to receiving an education that prepares you for a job in programming is a boot camp. Right? Wouldn't you agree? That's probably the best that you're going to get.
I didn't go to a boot camp. I'm going to believe you. You did.
Well, I don't mean I guess an online boot camp too, but I mean more of like an in-person boot camp. Like, that's the best you're going to get. Well, I guess, or an online one. That's the closest you're going to get to being ready at the, I mean, what would you think? Like, college is the alternative?
Well,
See,
I mean,
your
the thing
school
is,
was really
my
good.
my school was different, and it was very much geared towards that. But from what I understand, other schools are not. So if by boot camp you're just talking about the fact that you're building real world application, real world projects, yes, projects is the way to go.
Well, in the thing with the boot camp, like I said, the key factor here is that this is a not self-learned approach. This is, you're paying somebody to teach you how to do it. Like, the only way to do it, in my opinion, is either a boot camp or maybe a 4-year institution like DigiPen. 4 years is pretty brutal, though. Like, I don't know that. That's rough. I mean, a lot, and it costs a lot of money.
I was like, I think I said like $120,000 in debt.
Yeah,
that's a gamble.
Yeah, that's brutal. Like, that's why I say boot camps are really the only realistic, option for a lot of people. So I kind of came to that conclusion last night when I was thinking about it. Like, so what are your options? If you're not a self-motivated, disciplined person, what do you do? What's the route for? And part of me thinks like maybe programming is just not for you. Then, like, would you agree, or is that too harsh?
Well,
because we definitely, both of us know programmers that are not disciplined and not motivated.
Yeah, you have to at least, at the very least, you have to recognize that about yourself, and that, like, so you could, like, I feel like programming could be for anybody, if they are disciplined and if they can make themselves motivated.
Yeah.
I tried teaching my brother multiple times how to program, and he just during this during the corona, he lost his job, or he quit his job slightly before, so he came back, and it was hard. He came back to Vegas. It was hard for him to find something, so I said, I'm happy to teach you programming again. And I gave him some links, and we started going over it, and I would call him trying to motivate him, and he just said, I just want a job where I don't have to I don't remember his exact words, but it's kind of like I just want a job that isn't this complex.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's it. And it's like,
it's fair.
Yeah, I believe that he could learn to program. I don't think that people like my brother even. I don't think people are too stupid to learn.
Yeah, almost anybody could learn it.
Maybe there is an IQ level, because IQ is a real thing. And maybe there are certain individuals who have low enough IQ that it could be difficult.
Yeah, but even IQ is improvable.
I know, it's not.
You could even improve your IQ. That would be really hard, probably.
Yeah. Well, so okay, I'm not an expert
right?
at all this.
Or is this scientific? IQ's not fixed, right?
I don't know. No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. But
yeah, because guarantee you, I'm gonna go take a test now, and if it says I'm 100, I don't know what a good IQ is, but
I don't know if those online. Now it's a whole different conversation. I don't know if those online tests are good anyway. Fair. But here's the other thing is, I read a whole bunch of books on mastery, people who master chess, and those people do get better with deliberate practice. Chess masters aren't geniuses outside of chess, right? So they have become good at a very specific skill, and I do think that anybody could get good at programming, because it is now. Maybe they still might only reach a certain level. Maybe there's some level that I can reach. I don't think I've attained ultimate mastery where I understand, I see the code or whatever, I see the algorithms.
Yeah.
But so maybe I've reached that level, my maximum, or maybe not. I don't think that I have, because I just personally think the more that you study anything, the deeper your knowledge can go.
What's an example of something for you that you look at and you're just yep, nope, that's not for me. Cars
yeah, I don't care to work on cars. I can kind of see where it would be a little cool. I recognize that it would be cool, but
and you think you could learn it?
I think that I could learn it. That's the thing. There's nothing I don't think that I can't learn. I remember when I was in school, we had to take a 3ds Max course. So we had to learn a little bit of the art side just for fun. And so one of the things we were doing is we were taking this 3D model that we didn't create, they provided that, and we were building out walking animations, the keyframes. And I remember doing that, and I was just thinking, this is tedious and boring. Mm-hmm. And I go, oh, artists think what I do is tedious and boring.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, okay, let me ask you this. Is programming an art form?
There's very famous books called The Art of Computer Programming.
So, what do you think, though? Is it more is it more artistic, or is it more logical? I think the obvious answer is probably that it's more logical.
Yeah, okay. So I don't, just to avoid confusion, I don't like the word artistic, but I think it's creative, because you are.
Well, but hold on. Let's start. Well, okay. So would you say that if we're going to use the word creative, I'm fine with that. But let's define, because I want to talk about something, because I feel like we got to define the semantical. I'm always coming up with words. That's not a word. The semantical bound.
Semantics.
The semantics of the words we're going to use. Okay, so would you say you've got a logical side of your brain and you've got a creative side of your brain, right?
I've heard that's I've heard that's true.
Okay.
I don't know if it's true or not. I've just heard that's true.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that's
okay.
Unless that's a wives' tale, but
I'm not sure. But yeah, whatever people say, you're more left brained or you're more right brained. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is, I guess if programming was if humans do something, by nature it's going to be creative. That's got to be true. And the reason I say that is because even if you're well, no, I'm just some super stoic, non-creative programmer. No, you're still creative, because no two humans could create, no two programmers, even the most, go find the absolute best, most mastered programmers in the entire world.
The code would be different.
Go have them write the same application, it'll be different. So to me, by nature, that means it's creative.
Yeah.
It has to be, because both of you did it completely differently. So the point that I'm trying to get at is, for me, Because I've been trying to think about that too while we've been talking. What's an example of something that I look at and I'm like, I don't think I could do that. Because there's people that look at programming like that. We say anybody could do it, but there's definitely people that look at it. My wife, for example, she says there's no way I could do that. Like she looks at it and she's like, no way. That's not something my brain could handle. And I almost never look at anything like that. I look at anything and I'm like, okay, I think I could do that. And I'm not trying to be egotistical. I just think I could probably figure out nearly anything that anybody else does.
I want you to keep going, but I think we have a different perspective because our job is learning all day.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that's a good point. But the thing that I don't feel that way about is art. Like art in like your wife.
Oh yeah,
she paints.
That's exactly what I was thinking. She paints.
No
amazing.
way, I cannot do that. There's no way that I could do that. I don't know what else to say. Like no amount of you teaching me could make me good at that. I don't think. And so here's what I wonder: do I feel that way because I'm so uninterested in it? Maybe I'm just so uninterested in painting that that's the thing that stops me from being able to do it. Like, do you think you could apply yourself so much that you could become good at that? Do you? Let's say 5 years. If she taught you for 5 years and that's all you did, do you think you could become good at it? Or do you think there's something stopping you?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to say I don't think I could become as good as her because she's been doing it longer than 5 years. And I will say I have a physical limitation of being colorblind.
Okay.
So, but I think that I could learn the techniques. And I think this is where this kind of even goes back to your question of, is it more logical or is it more creative? Because we are, doesn't mean we've reached mastery, but because we're like quote unquote experts at Swift or whatever, right? Like we've been doing it long enough that we don't get tripped up by the logical part of it.
That's a good point.
Roughly, we still write bugs, unfortunately, right? Bugs are in code, but like for the most part. But yeah, so now the creative part shines. And so a lot of people, like there is a lot of like the semantics or like the rules. And the first step is learning those rules. If you've never done any programming, you have to go and learn that. And so you don't even know what that's like. How do you take this? How do you type stuff in it?
Yeah.
So possibly I could learn that despite being like colorblind. But maybe there are just like rules and techniques that I could practice where I would get better. Because I do believe that I could. And I used to play guitar and bass, and I used to write songs. Singing might be a little bit different. I think I was a horrible singer. But I could learn to play guitar. Maybe not be the biggest master. Maybe if I did it. But I think physically, because I've done it before. Physically, I learned the skill. And I understood mathematically. I was doing it logically on how to create songs.
I was about to say that. To me, if I look at guitar, I don't see guitar as being any more or less artistic than programming because guitar is kind of math. Like
it is, yeah.
You can't just play any notes and it sounds good. There's like mathematical. I mean, they even say that like almost every pop song, right, is like the same 3 chords or whatever.
3 or 4 chords, yeah.
Yeah, like that. There's just math to it. Like there's math to what sounds good together. There was even some guy. I don't want to derail the conversation, but there was some guy online that made some like AI robot that could play guitar and like he mathematically knew how to make things sound good. It's pretty cool.
Well, let's keep derailing. I was building a game one time, and I built a sound engine based on these little loops for like it was like a running game, and like it was like trying to be like Assassin's Creed, but no fighting people. You were just like running and jumping on stuff, and like the more that you would run, the more intense the music would be. And so we had these like a really basic drum beat, and then like a faster drum beat, like these little like clips, and then like and I wrote this engine that depending on how fast you would run, it would like layer it. So it would be like, oh, here's these 2 drum beats, here's this guitar, here's this thing. And I would like, obviously you can't just start one guitar beat halfway through or like 3/4 of the way through the drum. Yeah. So it was like, it was math, it was timed. And like, it was a fun project.
You kind of combine the two, the music and the programming.
Yeah.
So what was the point the point that I'm trying to make, the thing that I'm trying to get at is, I think that programmers often say anybody could do it, but I don't always hear like painters say that anybody could do it. So it makes me wonder if there's like actually like, because I feel like there's some physical limitation that stops me from being able to paint or whatever. But I do find myself, I mean, maybe that's why I even tell my wife like that. Maybe that's why I like programming so much. I was actually telling my buddy that last night too when we were talking. I said, it's not hard for me to get motivated because I just really like it. Like I have just as much fun as playing a video game, or if not more most of the time. And I wonder if that's just because that's my time to be creative in an art form that makes sense to me.
We're creating worlds.
Yeah.
I really think that it's more true with video games, but yeah, like we're creating. Yeah, I used to say that, and I did take an art class one time. When I got hired at DigiPen, actually I wasn't fully graduated yet. Like I was finished with all my core classes, but I still had to take like an English class, which I took online, and I had to take an art class. And so like typically, if you were back on the main campus, it would be like art for programmers, like really dirt simple. I got to just join in with like the life drawing class. So we would draw like the models, like the nude models actually would come in.
Oh,
yeah.
You did that at DigiPen.
I got to do that, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, all of the artists get to do it. I thought it was funny, and I'll tell this story. So my whole point was I did improve as I was drawing throughout this whole semester, right? Now, if you look at this, you're going to – it's still garbage, especially compared with everyone else in the class. But
this was in Singapore.
This is in Singapore, yeah. And so I got to, but yeah, like I was the only programmer in this class, and the teacher helped me learn like shading and stuff like that. We were using charcoal, I think. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. The funniest part though was we'd get these, like I said, this was like a second or third level class. So mine was obviously, it would have been the worst anyway, but they were like good. They were all good artists. Mm-hmm. And so like, you know, like the model they'd be like sitting there for a while. Like, and so sometimes we would do 5-minute drawings or sometimes like 30-minute drawings. Uh-huh. And so like they'd come by after like 30 minutes and kind of look at everyone's drawing. And like the first time that this model came by, you know, she's looking at everybody's and like, you know, and then she comes to mine and it was just really bad. She knew it was like really bad and then just like kept going on. It's like, one of these doesn't look like the others.
So hold on, this is a class at DigiPen.
Yeah.
It's an art class where you draw naked people.
Yeah.
What?
I mean,
But you said you were the only programmer.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, that's right, because DigiPen had, like, non-programming.
Yeah, like, DigiPen has a whole art degree. For, like, art.
But for games.
Games or movies. But, so, everything, so, okay, this is a fun conversation because...
Yeah, like, I'm amazed that
because DigiPen does exactly the same thing. Just like when we learn computer programming, we start from the command line. We want you to learn the fundamentals first. Like, you're going to learn the language. Mm-hmm. So, the first 2 years of DigiPen art degree, they don't do any digital art. They don't do Photoshop or anything. Wow. They do it's all fine arts. It's all the stuff that my wife did, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like it's pencil on paper, it's paint on canvas or whatever, right?
Wow.
And so like and they learn a ton of anatomy. Like good artists like my wife learn this anatomy. And so sometimes people will know Photoshop. They'll know that, like when we got these wedding photos, they modified some of the photos, and so this person knows how to use Photoshop, but they don't understand anatomy, and so like they like did weird stuff to like where they like, and Tay was just like, it looks like an alien. I look like an alien, and so then she doesn't know Photoshop, but she was going in and like fixing it, and but yeah, so at DigiPen they do all of the first 2 years of the whole degree is just the fundamentals. Mm-hmm. And that's the stuff that, like, on first thought, I wouldn't think, like, oh, yeah, you got to be an expert at biology. Now, the cool thing about DigiPen was because you're making video games, they would learn, like, a bat biology to understand, like, the wings of a bat. Mm-hmm. And, of course, and they'll learn, like, a lion biology to understand the skeletal structure of a lion. And then it's like, okay, now combine these.
Okay.
What would it look like if a lion had bat wings? Like cool stuff like that. And they would display that around the campus. It was pretty cool.
This is a really interesting thing about game development. I saw a video on YouTube the other day of somebody talking about how to build a woman in like I think it was like Unity or something like that. My YouTube history must be so weird. Like I just follow these weird paths. I'm like, that's interesting. So that came up, and it was weird because it was like it literally was like a probably 8-hour playlist of videos. And the guy's like, okay, well, first we need to understand the like anatomy of like a female character, like how does all of her stuff work. And then beyond that, like another thing that I wouldn't have even thought about is he's like, okay, now we need to understand how to make her dress, and to understand the dress we need to talk about silk. How does silk work? And you're like, oh my god, like I would have never thought of this. But now when I play certain video games, I've got like a huge appreciation for like the hair. Like you have to understand, how does hair work, how does it move in the wind. Like, dude, have you seen I'm probably going to play it if you haven't seen it. I'll throw it up even on the podcast. Have you seen the trailer for Far Cry 6?
No. Let's play it.
I want to play it. You have to see this, because I'm going to have to find a way when we're editing to play the audio so that everybody else can hear this too. You have to see this. This thing is fully like, I guess, created digitally by some designers, and oh my god, it is insane. And like just the amount of like the way that they had to understand lighting, the way that they had to understand clothes and skin and hair, and like it is freaking phenomenal. It's like 6 minutes. For those that haven't seen this yet, either on the podcast, this is at least interesting. This is really, really cool. I told Amaya, I showed her this the other day, and this is actually like a pretty intense trailer. And it's just crazy that they can create a fully digital trailer for something now that sparks emotion, and like the visuals are insane. And I showed this to Amaya, and I was like, I have to show this to Matt. I was going to show you outside of the podcast, but I think this segues into what we're talking about. Let me make sure that I can hear the audio, or that we can hear the audio. Hold on, everybody. This is so cool, though. Trust me, this is so worth it. Scarlet output. Okay, does this work?
Oh yeah, there we go.
Oh, it's a little loud.
Jeez, look at that fire. Is this the trailer right now?
Yeah. Jeez. This is all digital. And this is the guy from Breaking Bad. Yeah, I don't know if you saw Breaking Bad.
It's
but
beautiful.
I watched it. A piece of it. Look at that hair, yeah.
Perfect, but useless. I have something for you, Diego. Give me your hands.
Papa.
Now, the grenade is simple.
Look at
It has four basic parts.
Yeah.
The shell, which contains the explosive, the fuse, the handle, and of course, the pin.
The pin.
What are you doing?
Breathe, Diego. Breathe. The pin simply holds the handle in place.
I mean, like the reflection of his
is
lips.
only when you let
It's
go
insane.
that this grenade goes boom. Follow me.
Like the rays coming through the window. I just cannot believe that what you're
No.
looking at is not real.
It looks really good.
I am El Presidente, which means that someday you will be El Presidente. And our people, they do not know how to be happy. They are torn apart by opinions, noise, indecision, strangled by their own freedoms. And even if you have love in your heart, even if you want what's best for them, if you only want to save them from themselves,
Look at that bloom.
they will hate you, Diego. Everything you say, do, believe will be wrong.
Even his jacket, like, oh my god, it's just crazy.
Look at the folds on the pants. That's really impressive. Look at that fire right there, the smoke. Jeez, that's good.
And then this is so cool. That's Gus Fring.
They will answer you with screams, call you evil, a monster, and give you this. So you tell me, are you evil? Are you a monster?
Fire?
Yeah, the fire is
Because
so
our
impressive.
country is like this grenade, except it has two basic parts. Our people and you must clutch them nice and tight, or we all go boom.
The
You
wind and the
understand
hair.
now? Prove it.
Anyways, that is just so crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like, okay, and so some people might say, like, well, that's not actual gameplay. I get that. It's not actual game. Like, I don't think that any computer could actually, like, handle that type of.
Mm-hmm.
But still, like, that's the same. It's the same technology, though. Like, the ability to do that is just insane. I just don't understand. I just thought you'd think that was really cool.
Oh, yeah.
I
that
mean,
was.
in reality, it is just a movie, and it's way cooler when they've got the computing power to render it not in real time.
It's not in real time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that makes it a little bit less impressive, but just still, and I'm sure.
Still, are we sure that isn't in real time? Do we know?
Yeah, there's no way that's in real time.
The hair was pretty impressive. I mean, yeah.
But just the fact that people are able to do it, like the whole point here is that you've got to have creative people that are literally sitting there, because at the end of the day, creating, for those that don't know, like the people that are creating that fire, like they're having to like write that. They're trying to analyze, how does fire work? How do we like make it,
yeah.
What are the physics of fire?
There's still algorithms to do the
Absolutely.
fire. Yeah. And somebody has to know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so the people that are sitting there, like, I don't exactly know how it works with that. Like, you might know better than me, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's code when it's all said and done.
Well, so this was the huge leap from Pixar style stuff from like older Disney, right? And like Toy Story, maybe like, oh yeah, you're impressed, it looks 3D, but the really cool leap starts to come from things like Finding Nemo. Like in Finding Nemo, like, so in Toy Story, there's 3D-ness to it, there's shininess to it, but you could potentially draw that.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't. Like, maybe you couldn't either, but somebody could. But in Finding Nemo, people couldn't have drawn. The coolest thing about Finding Nemo is all those underwater shots where, like, you can see the sun, and it's like there's algorithms moving those waves. It's like it's really underwater, and the sun is... So it's like you couldn't really draw that. Or it would just be... I mean, maybe somebody could, but it's like to draw all of those frames...
I mean, you couldn't draw that.
That's exactly it. It's like that is why it was such a big leap, and that's why everyone went in that direction. It's because you can get such a cool level of detail because you're leveraging the computer.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was really impressive.
One thing that I like about that, because it kind of reminds me of what we do a little bit, is I imagine there's just some super geeky dudes there that are like, okay, it's our job to make the fire coming out of this car. Somebody's sitting there doing that. I don't know. I actually don't know what's involved. I don't know if there's code behind that or if it's some visual tool. I have no idea who knows what they build it with.
I mean, they're putting a particle effect in there. Like that's what it would be.
So I mean, okay, so when somebody writes like a shader, right? Because it wouldn't, is that, am I using that word like a shader would be like fog would be like a shader, right? Or no?
Yeah, I mean,
or it could be.
It could, yeah. I mean, like the shader isn't. The shader probably, I mean, it could actually be. So, like, you might define your...
A shader is a pretty loose thing, right? It can kind of be anything, right?
I mean, typically what a shader is doing is it is... how do you even describe that? It is interpolating between the properties of two vertices, basically, right? So it's like, so the really simple thing is if you have two vertices or like three vertices on a triangle, right? And you have like red, green, and blue. Like you're just interpolating between like the red and blue on one side and the green and blue on the other or whatever. And then obviously everything in between. So that's like the most basic of what a shader is doing. That's why it's even called a shader, is because it's shading, like it's picking the stuff to shade in between, right? Like you're providing two endpoints and it's picking, like it's figuring out the math to shade in between. But like the real thing is you get to write that program to do whatever you want. So because like you can manipulate more about the vertice than just the color, right? And so one of the things that have played around with. I think I showed you a demo on that engine that I built. Was you can actually change the location of it. So like if you wanted to build like in 2D, if you wanted to build something like like if you're building like a 2D space game and you have like a black hole, right? Like, and so what you want is you want the vertices, like things that are closer to the black hole would like stretch towards that black hole, right? So you could pass that information, like you could do that on the CPU, but that's actually like really more complicated. It's like really, really hard. But you could you could make it just a visual effect, because really maybe that's all you care about, right? And so one of the things you might do is you have like some big long ship and you have some black hole, and as you get closer, like you could pass in information into the shader, not just about your object, like your triangles, but you could pass in like, hey, I have this black hole, and then you could figure out, okay, well, what's the distance between, like, you got this like square object or whatever, what's the distance between this and this black hole point, and then like just as it gets closer, pull it more close, right?
Yeah.
And so like
And so what's the mechanism that does that? A shader?
That's so like the shader would allow you to do that, and like because all it's doing is you can just like typically what you'll do, like in my 2D engine, as I do have to make these triangles. I make these 2 triangles. I draw my picture on that triangle. If I want to start manipulating those triangles, I mean, I can do that on the CPU as well. But then, like, now if I want to try to have these 2 things collide, the math to get these 2 random shapes to collide is more complicated than just 2 squares. So if I was doing like that black hole thing, one thing that you could do is, again, it could just be like a visual effect where it's just like it's pulling, like visually, it's pulling the vertices. Like they exist somewhere in the world, but on screen, it's going to pull them, and it's going to do that stretch. You could do that stretch effect. And so that's like, I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does make sense.
Okay, so you could also do that with things like fire or smoke. Like, oh, I'm scratching my head. So like you are just defining, like I've never done that before. So I've like the fire that I've done is just particles, just like tons and tons of little like triangles or images, and just moving them over time. But like you can have the cool, more realistic effect because like what they're actually doing is doing some visual effect. Like it might just be some stationary object, or it could be actually like particles as well. But then like in this cone or in this area that exists, like this or box or whatever, you are manipulating some pieces of that to give it that weird effect, to make it look like, you know how like when you actually look at fire, like if there's a fire between us, it will like warp, sometimes warps the world. It's like that smoke. You can get that effect via the shader because you're saying like, okay, between these 2 triangles, like whatever, 6 inches above the fire at this point, like these, I want some of these triangles to be like more smoky, like, or like more like opaque, right? Like, and like some of these are more transparent, and then like you can make it change over time. So like, and again, it's just a visual effect.
So do you think those guys that made the fire for that demo, they were having to sit there and like do that, right? Like figure out the physics of fire and create the math behind that.
Yeah.
So
now, the Crytek engine, so they probably didn't do that themselves. I mean, somewhere in the Crytek engine,
somebody did.
Yes, yeah.
And then they could probably tweak the values or tweak the behavior a little bit.
Somebody has like.
Is that what they used?
That's what they have been using. I don't know about Far Cry 6.
But the other Far Cries use Crytek.
Yeah.
And do you think that they used the game engine to also make those trailers?
I don't know. That's why I was wondering if that was.
That's what I want to know, is because that would be my guess, is that whatever they're building these trailers in is the same thing that they're building the game in, but they just are able to export it and render it at much higher resolutions with much more particle effects, with much more.
It could be.
That if that is true, I would love to know the answer to this. That would be insanely impressive. That is what that game engine is capable of.
Well, so Crytek has always been, because like there was, I think it was called, was it just Crysis? Besides Far Cry,
Crysis,
that has always just been top of the line engine. That's why I was wondering if it was like in-game engine or not, because they've always just done killer effects that require like a computer that I never wanted to buy. It was cool stuff. So I don't know, but I do know because I played Far Cry 4. I played a whole bunch of the Far Cries, and at least there are a ton of cutscenes in the game that are in-game. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean all the trailers. It doesn't mean that all the trailers are, but like they've always like the in-game cutscenes still look really good for the time. I mean, a little bit better than for the time. So I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, there's a good chance that is. I mean, yeah, I can't say.
The real time stuff is getting really impressive though. Like the stuff that they're able to do in real time is crazy. The point that I was trying to make with that fire thing, even if it wasn't the Far Cry guys, even if it was the Crytek guys that did it, I just like when somebody comes to me in the app world, it's far less impressive. But like if a designer comes to me, we do this. It comes to us with some really cool and complex transition from page to page or whatever. I can't come up with that myself. I don't know how these designers can come up with the stuff they do. It's so impressive. But I love showing them that back actually working. Hey, check this out. That thing that you want. Like, because I'm sure at one point the cinematic guy, because that's what's crazy about like this, like the Far Cry trailer and some of these other games that are coming out is like there's like directors for these games now. That started happening in like the Call of Duty, like the early Call of Duty days, like I think in like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 or something like that. I don't know if I'm right on this, but like one of those games was where that was like the era that they started having like cinematographers and directors and stuff for games, because they're trying to create like it really is like a cinematic emotional experience when you play the game. So anyways, I just imagine that one of those directors, when they were making that trailer, he was like, hey, I need this fire to really spark this emotion. Like I really need it to behave like real. I want it to plume out the side of the windows. And these guys were like, okay, all right, we're going to have to get to work now. We can we couldn't have come up with that probably, as a programmer, maybe that's not what they're geared for. But I mean, that's the cool thing about humans just in general is like when humans get together, man, the stuff that they create really cool is stuff, crazy. Yeah. Even looking back at Amaya was watching something the other day on the Romans building like the dome. Building. She was watching one part on the Colosseum, but there was another building that they had that had this like dome or whatever, and it was built in like the 1st century, and it's just like just crazy that like.
How did you do that? You did that? You don't need to do that. You made a dome?
Yeah.
That's so much harder.
What's even more impressive about some of the older stuff that humans did, like the pyramids and the Roman stuff, is like it was generations. Like the guys that started building it were never going to see the end of it, and they knew that.
Yeah. That is interesting.
God, that would be horrible to me. Like I want to see what we create, but now humans build stuff a lot quicker. So you know about this is so off topic, but you know how like they have this thing in like China, in Hong Kong, they build skyscrapers in like weeks. Like it's crazy. Like
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like I think they were talking about this on I can't remember, maybe it was a Joe Rogan podcast. But like their like structural laws are not the same as what we have here, but because of that they're able to build structures in like weeks. It's crazy.
I know that in Korea they do build stuff fast. Same with Singapore. And I think I'm not going to say that they're unsafe. But I also do know that in downtown Daegu, the city that I lived, I never saw anything, but there was a couple of, like, if there was like a small earthquake or something, like some of the buildings would collapse, or like a piece of it would collapse. But like, so like maybe the regulations weren't as strict as here, but most of the time that didn't matter. When it mattered, unfortunately quite a bit. But like, they were really fast at putting stuff up, and like, so downtown changed a lot.
That's another industry where it's the same. Well, I mean, the whole topic of this episode was specialization versus generalization. That's the same thing where like we need somebody specialized in this type of building, and like that's going to be our architect, and then beneath him we're going to need people that specialize. And like even whenever I worked for a guy that did like one of my first jobs, I was paid under the table. It was doing like, what was the name of his company? I want to say that he said that he did flooring. Could be wrong about that. I can't remember. But the idea was just that like he just did like remodeling work to homes or whatever. And he was also like a contractor, so he would like, you could tell him like, hey, this is what I want, and he would go get like all the subcontractors and stuff to come do the job. And I just remember thinking like I was just like his handyman. So like when it was like, we would go to a job and like we would see like the end of it. We'd be reviewing the work that was done, and it'd be like, oh well, we forgot this little thing, we forgot to paint this thing, whatever. Like I'd help him do that real quick, just mop up the mess and finish things up, or literally just that, like mop up the mess
stuff,
when it was over. But I just remember thinking like when we would go do these work, like people would be like, okay, I want to get my stairs redone, and you'd be like, okay, well you're gonna go get like, in my mind I just thought, oh, we're gonna go get some hardwood expert, or maybe a flooring expert, or maybe even a stair expert. Maybe there's like somebody specializes in stairs. It was even more than that, dude. He hired like 4 subcontractors just to do stairs.
Oh,
like
wow.
because you'd have a company that specialized in handrails, and then you'd have one that specialized in the actual flooring, and then you'd have one that like it was crazy. Like, and then there was the painters. Like you need someone specialized in painting. And I just remember, like, when it was all said and done, it was like, man, you just need all of these super specialized, like, I'm going to hire a handrail company to come do the handrails.
That's interesting.
But he felt good about it because you're like, well, I know these guys do good handrail work. I don't need them to worry about anything else. This is what they do, and they do it well.
Yeah.
And, like, the world seriously wants that. I know that I talk to a guy at work about this all the time because we've been talking about we've both had the same idea for a really long time, but he's really big on that. Like whenever I use an application or hire somebody, like I just want it to be so simple of a decision. Like if my knee is broken, I go to the knee orthopedic surgeon. It's so clear who I need to go to. That's what humans want. Maybe humans have so much to worry about these days that the decisions they do have to make when getting help or consulting people or hiring people, it's like, I just want it to be so simple. So programming's getting that way too.
Okay, but here's now, I think we made a good argument for specialization, right? And like, of course, still like considering being a T developer, one of the interesting things I also thought about, possibly one of the dangers, is technology does change fast.
Yep.
Right? So iPhone isn't necessarily going away, like in the next 5 years, probably not in the next 10 years, but like something new could come along, whether it's Flutter or Ionic or React Native or whatever, right? But like, and the reason I bring that up is because I've known some web developers who knew like vanilla JavaScript, never wanted to learn anything else. I knew at one of my jobs, was he a Cobalt developer? And he was specialized in Cobalt. We had this like engine. Now it wasn't a game engine, but it was like this logic engine written in Cobalt that like the whole system used. But the company, like, he was the only, and so he happily did it. He happily worked on it. He probably made like a good amount of money. But the company was also deciding, like, okay, well, we need to get this updated, so we're probably going to they were going to contract out and build like another version of that.
Yeah.
Possibly in Java. And so I just remember him like looking, he's like, well, I better learn Java. And so that's the thing about specialization. Maybe like an orthopedic surgeon or like a dentist or like an eyeball, like LASIK surgery person isn't going to lose their, like people are still going to have eyes.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. But yeah, like what do you think about that? Okay, so specializing is good because you can make more money. You're not going to get hired at, what's the name of the company? I'm stupid. Ubisoft? Who makes that?
Oh, that makes Far Cry?
Yeah.
Ubisoft.
Yeah. So you're not going to get hired there to work on Far Cry until they know that you're an expert, like you're specialized in that, right? I mean, they might have interns, but you're probably not touching that cool core part.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're gonna get, if you specialize, you're gonna make a lot of money. But what if that technology changes? What if that goes away? Or like, how do you keep up to date? Like, what do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, it's the wrong industry for you if you don't want to evolve. That's for sure. I mean, I met a guy at my last job that he was a Ruby developer. That guy was not willing to learn anything else. And it's like, okay, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you live in a capitalist economy. If you live here in America, most of the world's fairly free market for the most part. Like, that's your decision. It's all supply and demand. If you want to just stick with Ruby, that's fine. But like, if there's no demand for you.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things I heard specifically about Ruby, I was listening to a podcast it was about money actually, but the guy happened to be a Ruby developer, Ruby on Rails, and he was talking about that. He's like, the thing is, there's a very low demand for Ruby developers, but there's an even lower supply.
That is true.
So he was, so like in that case, he was super specialized, and he was talking about he had some friends in that field they're super specialized, and the people who've built their system, like who gambled and said I want to do this in Ruby or whatever, they need those people.
Yeah.
And so like he says,
COBOL's the same way.
yeah, it's the exact same way. So like at some point they might change if the demand is really drying up, you're in trouble, but otherwise you are just super specialized.
Yeah.
Like right now there are still jobs, iOS code bases that are all in Objective-C, right? And sometimes people don't care, but like that's going to be a more rare skill as it's going forward. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I think eventually you have to update your apps anyway, but
I would just say, though, with that in mind, I've actually heard new developers say things like, well, I'm going to go learn COBOL because it's, it's like in super high demand. Well, I wouldn't say it's in high demand, but the people that need it and they're willing to pay for it, and there's like a low supply. I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I definitely don't think that's a good idea. I don't go learn something that's so obscure and specialized that you're going to be mad when you don't find a job. And like that guy that you're talking about, okay, let's say you do find an opportunity. Again, these opportunities are few and far between. So you're going to have a hard time finding another one. Plus, I doubt that you can make a lot more money as like a Cobalt. I mean, maybe you can. I don't actually know, but I mean, I do know that probably if there's I know there's a lot of like banking and government software in COBOL, and for those guys, I know they're probably willing to pay anything to have those people. But
there was like at my first job here in Vegas, like I said, I got hired and I was doing like Android and iPhone, and I ended up doing Ionic. They started having me do, and like my backend was like the backend that I was dealing with was all in like C#, but they had a bunch of these tools that was in like VB.net, which is like similar. It's similar enough to like C# and like they can convert, but like it is its own language. VB is its own language. And part of the reason I wanted to quit that job was also because I built these apps. The companies weren't like, the company just wanted an app, but they didn't know why they wanted it, right? And so they weren't like 100%. Okay, we want to push for this app. So the dev shop that I worked for, they were like, okay, well, we need somebody who can also kind of learn these VB tools. And I was just remember thinking like, I don't want to do that. I think that's the wrong direction, because the company itself had been around for like 15 years, and they had just massive amounts of code in VB. And so new stuff was written in C# because it's kind of like Swift and Objective-C as far as I understand, where they can like communicate. But they had me do that, and I was working on this tool. I don't remember what it was doing, like an automated test tool. And I understood the code, but I was just like, I didn't think that's where the world was going, and I thought my skills would be better like focused on newer technology, focused on mobile, and continue to specialize in that field. Yeah,
one thing, just like a closing thought that I kind of have about the whole generalization thing is that I feel like you can go know all these things, including what you were just talking about. What is it called again?
VB?
Visual
Basic.
Oh, Visual. Yeah, duh.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Visual Basic. You could go. Oh, well, Visual Basic's actually pretty common. That might be a bad example, but you could go learn like a bunch of stuff. And I know developers that try to just be general purpose, all-purpose developers. And the problem is that when you interview one, it's pretty clear, and you don't even really trust any of their skills.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's the thing. That's why I say, like, I recommend if you're like a expert Vue developer, really hone in on that. And then when they ask you, like, do you know Laravel, there's a way to respond to that well and just be like, oh, no, I don't. Like, I've really focused, like, my entire career on just being extremely good at Vue. And that guy's going to be like, you're going to establish a lot of trust right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Versus if you're like, oh, yeah, I know Laravel. And he's like, oh, do you know this? Yeah, I know that. He's going to be like, okay, well, maybe, But, like, if you're really stick to your guns, like, if I was interviewing for an iOS position, I think I would stick to my guns. And I would probably say, I've worked with, like, Laravel. I understand some of the backend stuff. In general, though, I focused my career on being a really solid iOS developer.
Yeah, this is what I focused on. Like, because I have said that to people. It's like, like, I've done some C#. Like, I've done some, do you understand backend? Like, I worked on it, but I don't know how it was set up.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
like I could, like, if you wanted me to, I could. But yeah, like
I mean,
have
there's a
focused
freebie though. Literally, you could just be like, yeah, I've definitely toyed with it. Worked on some applications that used it, but in general, I focused my career. Like, you don't even really have to sit there and dwell on it.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's another problem with interviews is when you ask people questions, they always want to over answer. You look, this guy respects your time hopefully as much as you respect his. Get to the point. He wants to know, do you know Laravel? Yeah, I've used it a little bit, pretty comfortable with it, but in general I focus my career on iOS. Boom, solid answer. He can't, like, I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed somebody and they literally like won't stop talking, and I'm trying to like jump in to move the conversation on, but they'll just be like, you'll ask them like, tell me a little bit about yourself. Oh, well, so when I was younger, I did blah, blah, blah. And like, they'll give me the whole backstory. And I'm like, okay.
I probably would talk a lot.
Yeah, like I just don't think that. I mean, that's even a bad example. The one where people over answer most is whenever you be. No, it's a bad example. But maybe a good example is like, tell me what you know about collection views. I don't know. And like these people will just go off on a tangent and tell you about the 15 times they've used it. Like interviewers are looking for just quick answers to make sure that you fit the role. That's really what's going on. It's just an elimination process. So like the more you sit there, and plus I think when I interview people, I hate it when people think like too much of themselves. Like, just be humble.
Oh yeah, I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah,
like,
that's a huge turnoff to an employer is like trying to be too egotistical.
But that's
too
also
much.
Like we talked about that before. That's also the difference between like be humble, but you can talk about yourself confidently.
Exactly, humble but confident.
Because you are selling yourself.
Yes,
you are selling yourself. But yeah, like I would never claim to be an expert at anything.
I mean, be an expert in the thing that you're being hired
That's
for.
fair.
I would say that. Just be an expert at that. Really stick to your guns on that. But then, with all the other stuff, be honest about what you do know. Yeah, I've worked with that, comfortable, but in general, that's what I would do. I mean, honestly, if I were to be interviewing, that's exactly how I would do it. Because that's what I want to hear when I'm interviewing somebody. I want to hear that you definitely know about the thing that I'm hiring for.
Yeah.
It would be convenient if you know a little bit about the other technologies, but in general, like, I mean, we even interviewed a QA guy, and he was really honest about his skill. And I was like, dude, I really appreciate. He was super good at automated testing. That's what we need. I don't need you to be good at anything else. It's cool if you're willing to learn this stuff, which he was. An eagerness to learn is a great attribute. But in general, I'm hiring you to do something.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's what fair. I want you to do. I don't care if you're good. If you tell me you're good at everything else, I'm going to question your skill in that specialized area.
In that thing. Yeah.
The world wants specialized people. Be a specialized person. That's the thing to take away. I feel like it's like this old. Like that's kind of what we've been talking about. Is like these old traditions of business, and I feel like the old tradition is to be like a general, all-purpose person. But like the world has changed. That's not what people want anymore. They want specialization. Be specialized.
Yeah. Well, so okay. So I'm gonna keep pushing back. I know we're getting towards the end. One of the things I said before we started the podcast, I was like, you're never gonna be like if you're an Android engineer. Android engineer is never gonna be like the principal engineer, like or whatever, like the VP of engineering, because it's maybe too specialized. Now you can still be like your lead on the team. You might be like leading or like you can attain some high level of Androidness, which is definitely true.
Androidness
or whatever, like or I like because there are tech leads or like principal engineer for iOS. Yeah. So to be fair, there is that. Kind of it depends on what you want to do. I still think it's really good to specialize. Again, go down, especially because right at the start, your goal is to get a job. But if your goal is to start your own company or build your own game engine, or not build your own game engine, build your own game, right? Like, I mean, maybe there's better ways of doing it than my stupid way of building my own game engine. But like, if you are planning on doing your own thing, it also does help. Well, maybe I'm wrong on this too. Actually, I was gonna say maybe it does help to be good at all that stuff. But you were just talking about that carpenter guy who hired out. He just hired and maybe
if you have the money.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's also part of business. Yeah, like he probably is familiar enough with that stuff. Like he doesn't want to do it. Like the handrails, for example. He's like, yeah, because these people do it way better than me. But I'm sure he's familiar enough to realize, like, oh, these people are good at what they do.
Yeah.
So, like, there is that interesting part of it as well.
I don't think it means that you can't be specialized in multiple things. I just think the thing is, like, the CEO at our current company, one thing he says all the time is, like, he meets a lot of young people that want to go try like all of these different things, and they want to try to be masters on all these different things, but he's like, you haven't even mastered the first thing.
Oh yeah.
Master the first thing,
Yeah.
then move on.
Get good at that thing.
I don't want to say that like I'm a master at anything, but I'm really good, I think, at iOS development, which is why I've now started focusing a lot of attention learning Laravel. And I think that I could eventually, in a year's time or so, maybe 2, be a master at both, and that would be awesome. And I would be comfortable telling people that. And that's good for me too, because if I want to start a business, then I know both of those skills.
Yeah.
And with both of those skills, they tie very nicely together, like iOS development and Android development and Laravel. If you know those 3 technologies, you can build an entire application and website for it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be really helpful. The thing is, not that it may be a small point, but you had said that you're not going to be like the VP if you are just an Android developer. I'm not just playing devil's advocate just to play devil's advocate, but I do think it depends on what the core technology of that company is.
That's
if the
fair.
core technology is Android, which seems unlikely, but if it was, then maybe. But like, it's not a coincidence that like our VP at our current company, he is very specialized in the core technology of the company, which is Laravel.
Yeah.
So, but if you're an iOS company, like it probably pays to be an iOS developer.
Yeah, I guess. Obviously, like the world that we're living in right now is web-based technologies.
That is
and,
true,
and
though.
back-end database stuff. So, of course, the person like if I didn't know, I mean, I'm not an expert at Laravel. I'm not an expert at like databases. So, of course, I wouldn't make a good fit for the person that every emergency rests on.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I am specialized in Android, but yeah, you're right. If we had some game shop, like I'm just trying to think of like a situation where there's like just minimal other pieces of dev.
Back end,
like
yeah.
like minimal back end, like no websites. Like, hey, we just make we're and I mean, you could have a mobile shop, a mobile dev shop, but you probably wouldn't have just an iOS or Android because most people want both.
Yeah.
So I guess you could be, if you were an Android developer and you were working at a company like that, we just make apps or we just make games for mobile. At some point, you probably would have touched the other one. But yeah, so you could rise up. It just depends on what the technology is. Like I was thinking about it very much from what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, but I think you are right though. That I can't debate. The core like technology right now is web-based stuff. Like that's the king right now. Like if you know back-end stuff, if you know like full stack development especially and API development, you're on a good like that's the basis for 90% of the applications on the App Store. But I would say if you were going to specialize in one of 2 things, or if you were going to specialize in 2 things at all, that's what I would do these days. Is I would be a full stack developer, which in and of itself I guess is not all that specialized, because I would consider specialization like an API developer or a front-end dev. But if you can learn like a framework like Laravel or something, or Ruby on Rails, although I wouldn't recommend that right now, but if you could learn one of those or a Node framework and then also know mobile app development, you've got a fit at a lot of companies.
Yeah.
And you could start your own. Yeah. Like that's every company nowadays needs an app and they need a website.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So I think like you're a little bit less. I mean, like you said, you can be specialized in multiple things. You can't be specialized in everything.
Yeah.
There's not enough time, but you could pick 1 or 2 technologies. I don't think I'm an expert at iOS either. Like there's way deep that I could go down, and I mean, I could even argue that I'm not an expert at Android. And I'm okay with somebody saying that. If you want something built, I can build it. I'm okay with that. Like I feel comfortable with that. But there's technologies that I haven't touched on.
I think you're humble though. I think you're definitely an Android expert.
Like overall, but like I'm sure like it would be easy. I mean, your buddy had mentioned like you have an Android buddy, and he had mentioned Rooms, right? So that's like core data, the core data equivalent. So somebody I might meet somebody and be like, you don't know Rooms, you don't know Android, and it's like obviously that would be kind of a stretch, but it's like some people might have their app rely on that so heavily that they would go like, how have you worked on Android for 4 years and never touched this thing?
Yeah. People got to give people a break though. Like I feel like that's a big thing in the software community. Like, oh, you haven't used this thing. Like, oh my god, how do you even? Dude, every company is so different.
And everyone. This goes back to like where I think interviews are slightly broken, because that's the thing is maybe you did work on iOS for 5 years and never touched core data, Oh, how come you never touched core data? Because we had a website backend.
Yeah.
I saved all that information on our own database.
Yeah, it wasn't a
It just-
requirement for that
yeah.
company. But also that doesn't mean that it's that's the other thing. Like nothing. I don't think like if you don't know core data or you don't know rooms or you don't know something like that. Like if you're a really competent developer, you're gonna be able to figure that out.
Yeah.
You could
And
figure
I
it out
agree with
pretty
that.
quickly.
I agree with that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be really hard in the beginning to learn core data, but once you become really solid, or rooms or whatever it is, like it's
Whatever,
not going to
yeah.
be that hard to create. So, what's the takeaway? What's the moral of the story here?
Specialize. I think specializing is the quickest way to get hired, right? Because you have to show that you're valuable in some skill, and I think that's the quickest way you're going to move up in pay and possibly title, if that's what we're talking about, right?
Yep.
Like the more in depth you know something, the more people are willing to pay if that's a thing that's needed.
Yep.
But I would say keep learning. Keep learning in your own specialized field, but then learn something else. Pay attention to where things are going.
Yep.
Like if you're a Ruby developer, keep going. Keep sucking those sucking those wells dry or whatever. It's like if there's people who need that skill, use that skill, but also maybe learn something else on the side. Like
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'd say.
For me, I agree with all of that. The moral of the story for me, and I can break this down with simple math and economics. If you know a little bit of everything, if you know a little bit of Laravel, you know a little bit of iOS, you know a little bit of Android, there's a huge supply of people that know a little bit of Laravel and a little bit of iOS and a little bit of Android. The deeper you get into mastery and specialization, the closer you get to the end, the supply exponentially diminishes.
There you go. Yeah.
And if a company says, I want the best of the best, which is pretty common, most of the time companies do want the best of the best and they're willing to pay for the best of the best. Most big companies got the pockets to pay for the best of the best. If you keep specializing, you keep going down that field, the supply is really low for you and the demand is really high. And that's simple economics. The demand for a low-skill Laravel developer is not that high and the supply is overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's so many of you.
I mean, if I exactly what you're saying. If I were to apply for 2 jobs right now, senior Android developer or whatever, like senior Android developer and junior Laravel developer, because I don't even know if it's fair to say that I'm junior.
Yeah, I think you are.
Okay, that's fair.
At least junior.
Like I think a junior is allowed to frequently ask questions to their seniors. So yes, I would be a junior. I still think, I would have a much greater chance of getting that senior Android position than even the junior developer.
And
Laravel.
the pay would be way better.
And the pay would be maybe double. Like I have no idea, right?
Maybe more, yeah.
Maybe more than double. And like so even if I were to try to get $40,000, like I'm trying to pick like a low number for a developer. Like if I wanted to go be a Laravel developer today and I applied, there still might be stiff competition for like I'm not as confident that I would get that job because
that's actually a really good point. Not only is the supply really high and the demand relatively low, but you also have a lot of competition. Like the pool of people trying to compete against you is really big.
Yeah.
Versus up at the top, if you're super duper specialized, the competition is near non-existent. If nobody's as good as you, then if they're looking for the best of the best, there's a lot of people that are going to claim to be the best of the best. But code speaks for itself. Like
that's a hard one, and that's where like hopefully the interview figures out like who truly is better.
Well, yeah, and that's the other part of it is your ability to interview, your quality of candidateness. Man.
Candidness?
No, candidateness.
Like being a candidate?
Like how good of a candidate you are?
Yeah,
Wow. That is a stretch of a word. But like that is a skill in and of itself that is kind of mutually exclusive to where you should be focusing your priority. Like regardless, you need to become a good interviewer and a good candidate.
Yeah.
That just is what it is. That's not going to go away no matter what. But if you can, that is something we could talk about later, but you got to really focus on that for sure. But on the flip side of that is that you got to have something to market yourself with. And for me, that should be specialization.
Yeah. And
like I said, you could definitely specialize in multiple things, but at some point you have to keep up with all the new technologies.
And that's
so
hard.
Like the more specialization you have, the harder that's going to be. And realistically, I don't know if you could be specialized in more than like 2 or 3 things just because of the amount of time in a day. I literally don't know. Plus, you don't want to be too specialized in too many things to where you're not actually the best of the best. Like if you're going to be specialized in 2 or 3 things, make sure you are like trying to be the best of the best. So anyways, that's
episode 9.
That's episode 9.
Nice.
That was a good one. Yeah, as always, check us out on social media. We really got to post more. We've been trying to talk to people a little bit more and whatnot,
but yeah, you can find us on Twitter. We don't have a Snapchat yet.
No.
But we do have an Instagram. We have a Facebook. Obviously, we have a YouTube. So give us that thumbs up and subscribe.
Hit that subscribe button.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be coming out with some more content. And we've been talking about that. We need
Yeah.
to do more than just a podcast. So we're going to do some stuff. I got a video coming up where I'm going to talk about why storyboards don't suck.
I'm excited for that video. I have some auto layout stuff too, some really introductory auto layout stuff that I've been working on.
Sick. Cool. Well, everybody keep their eye open. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see everybody next week.